And it is 14 to 11. Ron Arnold joining us now, Ground Racing New South Wales. Morning, Ron.
Good morning, Sean. Yes, very special program today for Going Greyhounds. Sean, it was one of those things when I was a youngster growing up. My dad, Ron, and Uncle Brian, we all had greyhounds in the backyard at both homes. And there was quite a number of them, and both Dad and my uncle used to take the greyhounds for veterinary purposes over to the Gladesville Veterinary Clinic. That's something that's always been in my mind some 55, 60 years ago when I used to travel in the car with them. There was a couple of very special vets in that particular practice, and one of them was a gentleman, Norm Teague, who went on to be the private vet for Jack and Bob Ingham. Bob Ratcliffe was another, and he went to the Sydney University to specialise very much in veterinarian. And there was another gentleman that I simply called Mr. Cooper. Over the next 4 decades, Mr. Cooper became someone that Australia absolutely adored, particularly on his TV work through Burke's Backyard and also Better Homes and Garden. And this morning, it's an absolute honour and privilege to bring to Going Greyhounds and say a very good morning, Harry Cooper.
Ron, you've really embarrassed me with that introduction, because I feel, like I wear a cap or a Cooper these days. I'd better go out and buy one that's about 2 sizes bigger. It just made my head swell. But there's one criticism, mate. It wasn't 60 years ago. I mean, I've been a vet now. This has been my 54th year. And I started off at Gladesville, very much as the intern, and very much as sort of Norm's offside and looking at horses. And then over time you realise that you can spend, an hour or so grooming a horse and getting everything right, and for your trouble you'll get a boot up the bum when you walk out the door. But having said that, these days I don't own any greyhounds at all. Instead of that, I've got about 70 Welsh ponies. But they don't tend to boot you up the bum as you walk out the door. They're a bit more genteel. So,
now, Harry, of course, the greyhound, just very quickly, has always been special, though, in your life, both professionally and personally.
Yeah, because these days I'm patron of the Greyhound Adoption Program, and I'm very much for trying to place as many greyhounds as we can in, suitable retirement homes. They are my favourite dog. There's no doubt about that. There are 3 favourite dogs of mine, Border Collies, obviously, Dobermans and Greyhounds. And Greyhounds are number one. People ask me that all the time. What's your favourite? Well, it's the Greyhound. And I follow them all over the world. I think I've been to every racetrack in Ireland when I had the time to go and do that many, many years ago. And they're just such a wonderful, wonderful animal. I love their temperament. They are physically probably the most perfect canine specimen we've got in the world. They've been selected to be very fast. They are the fastest breed in the world. But above all else, their temperament is just absolutely fantastic. And,
now, Harry, these days you're up the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and prior to Christmas, you, like many others, experienced the bushfires and the heaps of smoke that went through sort of those areas, Kempsey, Wauchope, Taree, Harrington, and obviously now down the south coast, and I've travelled that way a fair bit myself in recent times. The one thing I noticed down the south coast was, in the water, in the ocean, there's a lot of ash. So it sort of got me to think that people with greyhounds, the rearers and the breeders, they're out on paddocks. This smoke's floating around with ash, also a lot of dust storms. Just very quickly, for the comfort zone of people, what should they look for in their greyhounds in, eye impacts or respiratory issues, something, or is the ash good or bad in your water?
Well, obviously, if we get smoke inhalation over a long period of time, and there's a lot of research obviously been done in humans, both in Australia and in America, because of these massive wildfires they get in California. And we know that there are 2 things which can cause problems. One is carbon monoxide, and carbon monoxide causes ultimately death if it's in a big enough dose, because carbon monoxide bonds with the hemoglobin, as oxygen does, and it bonds what we call preferentially. In other words, if it's got the chance to breathe oxygen or it's got the chance to breathe carbon monoxide, it'll actually link up with the carbon monoxide rather than the oxygen, which is a big problem. But that's a short-term problem. In the long term, I guess the answer is we don't know. I couldn't find anything in the literature anywhere which talked about effects on animals long term. In humans, there's lots of maybes. We probably haven't been around long enough to know if the maybes are going to be fact or not. But the big causing problem is these little particles which exist, really fine particles, and these particles are hydrocarbon particles, and they are capable of doing lung damage. There's no doubt about that. They're capable of doing lung damage, particularly if the exposure's over a long period of time. And there's no doubt in some of those areas where I live, we sort of we went through what I thought was a solar eclipse 2 days. You just couldn't see anything. The sky was black and the sun was a red ball when you could see it. And it was like a solar eclipse. It was quite incredible. And you yourself coughed the whole time because of the smoke. And I've still got a cough today, and I think that's probably associated with the amount of smoke that I breathed in. So if it's only short-term exposure, I think we're probably going to get over it. I think the dogs are going to get over it, and in time they'll be fine. My only real concern, Ron, is that I like the odd drop of vino, and all the grapes from South Australia are going to be affected rather badly. So I won't be buying too much wine from South Australia for a year or so till we get over that smoke taint. But as I say, it's these little particles which cause the problem and can create, there's no doubt about it, damage within the lungs. Some of this damage is permanent. But most of this is relative to humans rather than dogs. We just don't know what effect it's going to have on animals. And I guess we'll find out in time to come.
Now, Harry, of course, with the extended drought area and now also with this bushfire season, obviously water's been a major issue in the regions in particular, or even impacting now in Sydney. As far as trainers and their breeders, as far as supplying their greyhounds water, they give them every day, but obviously some struggle to get a lot of fresh water in some areas now. Is there little sort of secrets they can do as far as an additive or a supplement they can put into their water bowls that obviously can help them?
If they were concerned about water quality, I'd be buying bottled water of some description and using that if they thought their water quality source was really poor. Today, most people with a house have got a small water tank on the side of the house. In fact, I think it's law in most situations. If you build a home these days, you've got to have a water tank on the side of the house. But the problem with that is that there's so much ash around that when it actually rains, unless you've got a little diverter on to start off with, and you channel the first bit of water away from your tank, you're going to wash all that ash that's been sitting on your roof into the tank. And you can actually taste it in the water. There's no doubt about that. But taking it in orally probably isn't a major worry. The concern is breathing it in, Ron, and the damage that it does to the lungs. And I mean, if I were presented with a greyhound that was coughing and had been through a fire area or something like that, A, I'd want to take some X-rays of the lung, and B, I'd want to have a look down into the lung tissue using what we call an endoscope. That's a little flexible fibre with a light on the end of it, where you can actually see what's going on within the lung tissue. My personal experience was that over 40 years ago, when I lived at Annangrove in Sydney, we had a fire go through the area. Now, I was at Rose Bay because my other love, as everyone knows, was budgerigars in those days. When I got home, there were 14 houses gone in our street. My back veranda was alight, and I'd lost 13 greyhounds. They died. The ones that survived never got over the cough. Never got over the cough. And it's a tragedy, and I guess for me, that was probably the beginning and the end of breeding and racing greyhounds. It was just pretty demoralising sort of stuff, and just break your heart.
And I suppose, Harry, for particularly the pups, the one that might be 3 or 4 months of age today, they're not going to be broken in around at the end of the year, 10 months' time sort of thing, and that's when the body's put under a different sort of pressure. And is it a chance that if there is something lying in the lungs that it may not be shown up until the greyhound's put under, severe sort of, training efforts?
Yeah, this is quite possible because greyhounds are such an athletic animal, and they've been selected, for their athletic prowess more than anything else. And of course, I mentioned their temperament is first class as well. But I think that if they are only exposed to a moderate amount of smoke and for a short period of time, then I sincerely doubt we're going to get any long-lasting effects. As I said, pups that were affected at my place, and there was a litter of pups that were some 14 days old, so they were still virtually in the whelping box. I ended up having to put most of them down because they just couldn't stop coughing. But bear in mind that was the heat of the fire, more than the smoke of the fire, and all these people and animals in particular, and obviously I'm in an area near Port Macquarie where we had all the problems with koalas and what have you. These animals are burnt on the outside, but they're also burnt on the inside. And it's the inside burn that's the problem, the damage that's done to lung tissue and other organs like kidneys and liver. That's the extreme case. My view is that dogs that are exposed, even at young ages, to smoke for a short period of time are going to recover. They're going to recover. And I doubt there's going to be any long-lasting effects. But we don't know, Ron. We don't know because we've not experienced it before. We don't know.
Now, Harry, obviously last Saturday, certainly here in Sydney and Western Sydney, temperature were mid-40s. There's probably no real little secrets, but what should trainers sort of do that are on properties when these 40-degree days happen? You know, their dogs, they can't always get round to all of them. So,
Ron, I think if you've got dogs, obviously that are racing, and you haven't got air-conditioned kennels these days, nothing wrong with you. Quite honestly, because these animals for you are your livelihood, and you've got to look after them. And the only way to do it is to do it properly like that. We know we have temperatures as vets above which you're not allowed to conduct race meetings, and that's fair enough because of the stress on the dog. The greyhound's temperature elevates considerably when they go out and race, so they're racing on a very hot day. We're not happy with that. We'd rather we cancelled meetings rather than got over a certain stage where we actually produced heat stress. But for a situation where you've got, say, pups in a yard or something like that, cooling the dogs down with water. But again, that's a bit scarce at the moment, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, it is.
So cooling the dogs down with water would be the best thing in the world. Now, the ideal way to do that would be to have large, deep water troughs, something like you'd have in a yard for cattle or horses, big plastic troughs. The dogs will jump in there and cool themselves down. They'll jump right into the trough. They'll get themselves continually wet. How many dogs have you seen on a very hot day, and I'm not just talking greyhounds, I'm talking domestic dogs too, go to a water bowl and using both front feet, scoop the water out all over themselves to cool off. They're very smart animals. They've been on the planet a long time. They've learned to cope with so many of these things. But you're right, the temperatures have been extreme. And where I live, it's not just the temperature, it's the humidity, which is very, very difficult to cope with as well. Very difficult. So provide somewhere where they can jump in and cool off, like a big pool, or if you can't afford something as deep as that, well, just get some wading pools. Those kids' little shells, they look like plastic shells. They can hold water. The dogs can get in there and splash water all over themselves, and certainly provide shade. That's obvious shade.
Now, Harry, of course, your involvement now with the adoption programs in the last few years has been across all the states of Australia. Has been a great push for the greyhounds, and as you mentioned, they're just wonderful pets. And those that are listening to us this morning that may ever think about having a pet, there is basically none better than a greyhound.
Ron, I did a story just not long ago that went to air about this couple who actually sort of foster dogs. So what they do is they take the greyhounds off the track virtually, and they foster them, get the dogs used to a situation. How difficult it is for greyhounds to walk upstairs, for argument's sake. A greyhound sitting on a lounge, that's a bit beyond belief. They actually transition these dogs from a racing situation into the home environment. So we did a program with them. They already had 2 dogs, and they had a brindle bitch, which they were putting through. I can't remember the name at the moment. Anyhow, it went to air, and blow me down. On Saturday morning, they were out walking the dogs, and it was only a fortnight after I'd done the story, which is a very quick turnaround. And a couple walked up to them and said, "That brindle bitch, that's the dog that was on television last night, wasn't it?" And they said, "Yes." They said, "We want her. We want her." And that was it. So it's all got to be approved. You've got to have the right sort of backyard. You have the right sort of facilities. You've got to go through a little bit of a training program yourself to learn how to manage a greyhound because they are different to other dogs. And again, they've got to still keep transitioning through this kennel situation into a situation where they're part of a home. But look, it's wonderful to see. And GAP and the other organisations involved in rehoming greyhounds are just doing a fantastic amount of good. And Ron, I look at it from this point of view. I love working with greyhounds. When I was in practice, it was absolutely fabulous. I don't do much practice anymore. I don't have time. I guess greyhounds took me all around the world, talking at various conferences and one thing and another, because I did have a few interesting things to say about various problems in greyhounds. So I was invited to speak at lots of places. So they've taken me around the world twice. They built my first home. This is payback time. This is time when I need to thank greyhounds.
Harry, it's been an absolute honour this morning to speak with you, and not just myself personally, but everyone in greyhound racing. We've appreciated very much everything you've done for the sport, and we certainly will be watching the program Better Homes and Garden this Friday when it kicks off again for another season. You are welcome to Wentworth Park or any greyhound track, I can assure you, in Australia. Anytime you've got a spare night, please, it's only a phone call away. And I really, myself, hope we cross paths very soon, mate. And again, thank you so much indeed. Great health for the future, and we look forward to catching up. And you've been an absolute legend in Australia, and you're certainly remembered very strongly and devotedly with the greyhound world.
Ron, I have a picture on my wall. A picture on my wall is 3 greyhounds. And in one of those pictures is what I consider to be the greatest greyhound ever bred or ever raced. It's a dog called Master McGrath. It may not mean anything to people in Australia, but it means a lot to anyone who's Irish. Master McGrath was the only dog to win the Waterloo Cup 3 times. The picture is something like 120 years old, and you couldn't buy it for love nor money.
Mate, all the very best. Thank you so much, and you take care. God bless.
Thanks, mate. Bye-bye.
Well, Sean, there it is, a special moment on Going Greyhounds today. Harry Cooper, one of the icons in the media world. We really appreciate his time, and thanks very much, mate, for helping us through another program.
Good on you, Ron. Ron Arnold, Greyhound Racing New South Wales, 11:02, Sky Sports Radio.